I am a faculty member at the Bush School, and I teach courses there on intelligence and counterintelligence in keeping with my background. As some of you know, before coming to Texas A&M, I was in the Central Intelligence Agency for 30 years, mostly overseas in clandestine operations. And at our headquarters, my most senior position was Chief of Counterintelligence. And that's our topic tonight, counterintelligence. I can't think of anyone better able to lead that discussion for us this evening than our honored guest. It is a personal and professional pleasure for me, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce you to my counterintelligence colleague. Robert Booth was born in Tennessee. He has a degree in political science from the University of Tennessee. He was a special agent for the State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security from 1974 to 2002. His overseas assignments included Beijing, Geneva, Tokyo, Haiti, and Paris. He was Deputy Director of the Department's Office of Counterintelligence from 1996 to 2002, and also served there as a consultant from 2003 to 2012. He has received numerous awards for his work in counterintelligence. He is the author of an outstanding book, which I use in my counterintelligence classes, and is called State Department Counterintelligence, Leaks, Lies, and Spies. Robert has also been featured in the CNN spy series, Declassified. Mr. Booth has been involved in some truly classic espionage cases including Aldrich Ames, Felix Bloch, and Kendall Myers. So please give a warm Bush School and Texas A&M welcome to one of our country's leading spy catchers, Mr. Robert Booth.
Welcome. I'm glad you're here. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Andrew Nassios and Leslie Rule for inviting me down here to come to talk to you about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. And I want to thank Jim Olson for also taking advantage of me to teach a 3-hour course to his class while I was down here. So I'm very happy to be here. Just 3 quick housekeeping chores so that you know where we're going. I think it was indicated earlier, question and answers will be at the end. I don't want to interrupt. I'm going to talk to you for about 50 minutes. So if I get interrupted to answer questions, it will delay getting through it in our time frame. After 37 years with the government, I'm very good about using acronyms. I'll do my best not to. The only acronym that I'll probably use is IC, and that stands for the intelligence community. And the intelligence community is comprised of the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, the National Security Council, and that's the group that gets together to determine how counterintelligence will be done. They do other things too, but they're the guiding light when we have to conduct counterintelligence inquiries and counterespionage investigations. And there's a distinct difference between those two. I'm going to try to get into that also. I will talk to you about what is counterintelligence. I'm going to talk to you about how secrets are made. And then I'm going to talk to you about what I consider one of the greatest threats to the United States today, and that's economic espionage. And normally when you think about espionage, you're thinking about military secrets. You're thinking about diplomatic secrets that are revealed. I'm here to talk to you for about 10 minutes. I'm going to beg for your attention on this, to talk to you about how serious the threat to our national security comes from economic espionage. And then finally, to finish up, I'm going to walk you through a specific counter-espionage case that I work with the FBI. So, as professors normally say, let's get started. Some 50 years ago, the Supreme Court, in a decision called New York Times Company versus the United States, the Supreme Court said, it is inarguable that the most important mission of the U.S. government is to promote the national security and ensure the safety of its U.S. citizens. And the U.S. government does that by frankly amassing the most amount of information about some of the most insignificant things and significant things. They generate this information, they analyze it, they collect it, and they make recommendations in order to safeguard American citizens. For example, if the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration decides, in looking at information from meteorologists and the others, that a Category 4 storm is about to hit the eastern coast of Texas, they rally, they inform, they get information out there. If it's going to hit, we got to get the National Guard out. We have to have evacuation routes. We have to alert the SHRPs. We got to close down bridges. We have to stockpile food. All those actions are taken by the U.S. government in order to safeguard Americans, reduce casualties. On the other hand, there's a whole other category of information and activities that the U.S. government undertakes to safeguard American citizens that must not be ever in the public domain. Secrets are created every day in Washington, D.C. When the NSA creates codes, when the CIA talks to its assets, when the FBI talks to its subjects, when the Department of Defense's African Command launches a SEAL operation in Yemen to rescue an American who's being held captive by rebels, when the U.S. government and the State Department is dealing in Washington, D.C. to how to react to what is going on in Venezuela, whether we're going to impose sanctions, whether we're going to take actions with other countries to mitigate what is going on in the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. That information should not be in the public domain. It allows our government to be efficient. It allows our government not to reveal our hand until we have to do it. And that's why foreign countries have their spies. Foreign countries need to know what our intentions are, diplomatic, military. They need to know our capabilities. And we, in order to be effective, for we to get our government to do what it needs to do, we need to safeguard those secrets, the classified information, the confidential, the secret, the top secret, the stuff that's above top secret. We need to keep it out of foreign countries' intelligence services' hands. And that's why spies exist. There are two kinds of spies. The first kind of spy is a foreign citizen from country X who is sent to the United States under diplomatic cover or other kinds of cover. Some of it's not protected. So if a foreign diplomat, an intelligence officer, is working in Washington, D.C., and he is determined by the FBI, who alerts the State Department that he's not a diplomat, but he's conducting activities unbecoming of a diplomat, he's declared persona non grata, and he and she is sent out of the country. Other foreign citizens come to the United States under journalist cover, student cover, tourist cover, and they come to the United States in order to go about collecting information on the United States. Now, I know you've all seen the TV series The Americans, right? Ain't a bit of truth in that program at all. When the first time they showed it, my wife and daughter said, "Robert, we want you to see this thing," and I'm watching it the first 15 minutes. I said, "That's not possible. That's against the law. You can't." I was banned. I was sent away. I was never allowed to watch that program again with my wife and my daughter. So, the second category of spy, and this is the more nefarious one, and that is a U.S. citizen who has access to classified information and is most likely a government employee, is convinced for a variety of reasons to betray his or her country or his or her oath of allegiance and will supply classified information to a foreign intelligence service. And it's something that's really hard to understand, but this is the basic point you need to understand about espionage. Espionage is the collection of information against the will of the target. And this is important to understand because sometimes that target is not necessarily the government or the military, but it's Boeing aircraft. It's Texas Instruments. And I'm going to get into that just a bit later. So, you understand this. Economic espionage costs the United States between $75 and $110 billion a year in lost revenue. It's not insignificant. So, I'll address both categories. So, spying, it's nothing new. It's been going on for 275 years, and no one better than George Washington made it clear back then that he feared for the fact that his secret information might be intercepted and turned over to the British. He was running a network of 5 spies, 4 men and 1 woman in New York City that were critical for his understanding how General Howe and the others were operating in New York City. He needed to protect other defense information from the Brits. And when we talk about spies and traitors from within, who was one of his great friends? Who was one of his colleagues? Benedict Arnold, someone he trusted. Now, the funny thing about Benedict Arnold, he actually betrayed the Brits first. He was a British citizen. So he betrays the Brits, then he comes to us, and then he betrays us. But can you imagine George Washington finding out that when Benedict Arnold had sold out to the Brits the defense plans for West Point for money and a promotion to general, George Washington said, there it is. That's the one thing he dreads in the world is spies. If he doesn't keep his secret secret, he's not going to be able to win the revolution. So the question is, why would an American citizen who has access to classify betray their country? It's always hard to understand that. Well, there's 4 reasons, and I'm going to run them through with you. I call it MILE. Money, ideology, leaks, and ego. Every single spy will fit in this category, pretty much so. And the first one I kind of get, but I don't like, and that's money. Everyone, remember I talked about the intelligence community? Every member of the intelligence community has had one of their employees provide information to a foreign service for money. Robert Hansen, $1 million plus. Aldrich Ames, 1.5 in diamonds, I think, and that nasty Jaguar he had. Robert Lipka, NSA, this is a book called Fool's Mate. It came out about 2 years ago, where he freely admitted while being talked to by an undercover FBI agent, he made it very clear, pure greed, loyalty to the dollar. But then again, you see so many Americans who are not in the government, who are out in private industry, who also can be trumped up over the issue for money. So this one, I can understand. People want to live better. They want a better lifestyle for whatever reason. I mean, in the case of Robert Hansen, all of his kids were going to a private Catholic school in Northern Virginia. But on an FBI salary, it really was hard to understand. It's kind of something that slipped under the door. But when you have unexplained wealth, it's something we should look at and try to understand better. We can't. The second category, and this is the one that still stumps me after 35 years in the business, it's ideology. And interestingly enough, it's almost unique to the State Department. It's rare in the intelligence community that you will have an employee who will spy and give information to a foreign intelligence service because of ideology. And look at some of the countries they're spying for. Greece, South Africa, the ANC before they came into power. Taiwan, I mean Liberia, I didn't know Liberia had a foreign intelligence service. But look down here. Kendall Myers and Marta Rita Valaquez. They spied for Fidel Castro because they felt the United States government had almost betrayed and overthrown the 1959 revolution, which was a pure and good revolution. The revolution only turned to communism when the Americans put on a semi-embargo and did bad things to Castro. They spied because they believed that we had hurt the Cuban Revolution. Missing in here is the one other person who spied for the Cubans, and that's Ana Montes. She worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and she, like Kendall Myers, and Kendall Myers, he's the great-grandson of Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone. He was convinced that he would do everything he could to help the... He became a spy for the Cubans before he joined the State Department. Donald Lieber became a spy for the African National Congress before he joined the State Department. The State Department is a unique position from which foreign intelligence agents or Americans without access, foreign intelligence services like access to the State Department. It's something they really do. And it's been my bane, kept me in business for almost 35 years, not happily when I would see things like this. But ideology. And how do you detect ideology? What kind of counterintelligence program do you go up to somebody and say, how do you feel about Castro? And how do you feel about this? It's almost impossible. They'll sneak through almost every time. But I'm going to talk about our counterintelligence programs in a bit. The other and third category of how classified information is compromised against the will of our government and it hurts our national security interests are those Americans who substitute their personal belief for their oath of allegiance. Now, up top up there, here's George Washington. It is much to be wished that our printers were more discreet in many of their own publications. Here's George Washington complaining about the papers leaking. Under Mr. Obama, more prosecutions of reporters and people that leaked to the press than any of the 4 previous presidents from Mr. Obama. George Washington said he had the same problem 270 odd years ago. And look what GRU, and that's the Soviet military intelligence, Colonel Stanislav Lunev says, I was amazed and Moscow was very appreciative at how many times I found very sensitive information in American newspapers. Freedom of the press, right? The Americans have a right to know, right? So Private Manning, I think that the Americans need 250,000 State Department documents, classified documents that you can get on WikiLeaks. I hate to do this. Here it is. 250,000. In these documents are the names of sources who are helping the Americans in Sudan, in Kenya, in Libya, those people who would rather work with Americans but be low profile, their identity not known to their local countrymen. Mr. Manning, Private Manning, does not believe that will hurt America. This is one of my favorites. Reality Winner, a contract employee for DOD in Atlanta, Georgia, 2 years ago. This is an actual top secret ORCON document. It still is, as far as I know. But it's on the internet, so I can publish, right? I can have it here tonight. I'm waiting for the FBI outside the door when I show up. Any case, in it, Reality Winner believed strongly that the NSA had conclusive proof that the Russians had interfered in our presidential election. And she felt as though by not revealing how we can positively confirm that the Russians were behind this, it was wrong. So on her own belief, she said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put this out on the internet. I'm going to show, I don't have all the documents on here, it's only page 1, how the NSA was able to backtrack deep down, go through the servers, and actually show which hackers at what addresses in Russia had been used to send disinformation onto the internet. It's an incredible document, great work by the NSA, but when she got it out there, what's the problem? The Russians now know our capability. I mean, there's a good shot to let the American public know that, yes, the Russians probably were involved. But now the Russians say, well, now we know this information. We'll just go ahead and try something else. We'll put more masking out there. We'll hide. We know what not to do in the future. She's actually serving 6 years in jail for what she did. She's currently in jail right now. But again, tremendous law, compromise of information done by an American citizen with access to classified. And the final reason why I think people spy, my own opinion, is they are the most incredible narcissists. They love the fact that they can walk into a room of their friends and nobody knows that they're a spy. They have secret information. They have incredible vanity. They strut. They swagger. They're better than you. They know better than anything else. They're true narcissists. And I interviewed Rick Ames in prison in Allentown, 10 years ago. He'd been in jail 12 years. And I'd asked him some very specific questions about an individual he compromised in Rome, Italy. And he just sat on the chair like this, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he is proud as he could be of the fact that he was a successful Russian agent. Not a bit remorseful. I've interviewed 2 other people convicted of espionage. Kendall Myers, it's in chapter 1 of my book. He too, he was proud of the fact that he was a successful agent for the Cubans for 22 years. And I wanted to really ask him, I said, you know, Kendall, if you love Cuba so much, why don't you just go there? Sail away in your 35-foot Malmo sailboat. Oh, no. He doesn't mind, but he doesn't want to live down there. So, I mean, you kind of have to wrap your head. He's ideological, but he doesn't really want to live there. So that kind of tells you something. So now we know basically why an American citizen would spy against his country. What we have to understand is secret information. The one I talked to you about at the beginning of the program here is that it's clear that we need to keep everything about collecting secrets as much as we can. Now here's where I'm going to deviate, because normally I would go on and on more about military and diplomatic secrets, but I'm going to take a little side tour here to talk about something that's more near and dear to my heart and affects all of you here in the room here today, and I'm not kidding. And that is economic espionage. And there are any number of countries today who are attempting to gain American trade secrets, proprietary information, intellectual property, our capabilities in the industrial format. There are many countries that do it. If I mention the name of Japan, if I mention Hitachi and Toshiba, both those companies have been successfully sued in American courts for having stolen American trade secrets. But we've forgotten about that. But there's not a single MRI machine invented by Honeywell being created in the United States today. Not a single one. But I'm not going to focus on the Japanese or the Koreans or others. I'm going to pick on my 2 favorites, the French and the Chinese. I'm going to start with the French, our oldest and most prickly ally. Oh yes. In 1960, Charles de Gaulle authorized his Foreign Intelligence Service to collect economic information on America's industry. And he made it very clear. He said, we can't compete against the American juggernaut. They're big, they're powerful. We're still recovering from World War II. So I authorized my intelligence services to do it. In an incredible leak of information, the head of the French intelligence service gives an interview to the local press that says, yeah, it is absolutely essential that we steal economic, scientific, and technological and financial information from around the world. The French. It's the head of the intelligence service saying, this is what I got to do. Before this, in 1981, Pierre Marion, the head of the French intelligence service, was interviewed by Tom Brokaw on NBC News. And in it he said, we used to place tape recorders, we've got to go back a bunch of years now, under the first-class seats of Air France flights whenever we knew American businessmen were in those seats, so we could hopefully record their conversations. Hopefully they make an indiscreet comment. He admitted this. The French don't deny it. And it starts years and years ago when we first catch a French citizen trying to steal information. Then by Robert Goldberg. He was at Renaissance Software. He was caught downloading information. He was arrested by the FBI. He served 9 months in jail. But that was the start, 1980, 1982, with the advent of software and computer stuff, that the French realized they could not be competitive with us. So they went ahead and started stealing information. It was CIA Robert Gates who said, with the French, they're our defense allies, and economically, they're our competitors. My personal involvement with the French was their attempts to fight off Boeing. Airbus Industries and Boeing Industries is a $100 billion business. And we compete strictly with them. When I was assigned to the American Embassy Paris 92 to 95, I was the security director at the Paris Air Show, where I got to see firsthand how the Chinese were attempting to steal information from the American business chalets that were put on Le Bourget airfield. And those little things you see in the back there, Texas Instruments would come out, Boeing would come out, Martin Lockheed would come out. And every time just before the Paris Air Show would happen, occurs every 2 years, I bring all the security directors and seniors from all the American aerospace industry to come to the embassy and would have a security briefing. I'd remind them of the capabilities of what the French intelligence service would do. I would tell them, do not leave your classified or technical manuals behind in your hotel room. Please don't get on the phone and try to talk around something. Go to get a secure phone. And we'd go through this. And what would happen over the years, we found out the French intelligence service, someone did successfully steal a technical manual out of one of the hotel rooms involving one of our more advanced helicopters. The one that I really like, and I appreciate the French on this, they offered Lockheed Martin free chauffeur service. And, the French. And at that particular point, remember, we were competing with the French for the big the F-16 program, the largest arms bill that was ever done. And I think their plane was the Rafale. But in any case, it turns out that these 4 chauffeurs were actually active French Air Force officers who spoke perfect English. And they were hoping when they were driving, the members of Lockheed around, the 2 guys and the Lockheed people in the back seat would inadvertently make an indiscreet comment about the competition, about prices. But the best one I lived with Lockheed Martin, we went ahead and put a small video out back where the back door opened up to their chalets, and we caught the French cleaning force. They would come in and clean out the trash cans at the end of the day, and a French car would pull up behind Lockheed Martin, and the char force would come out and hand them the trash. And then hopefully Lockheed Martin had done something stupid, like thrown in a classified document, that would help the French intelligence services work with their defense industry and Air France, with Airbus Industries, to compete against the United States. Airbus and Boeing have been going at it for years. But you say, well, how does this affect me? How do the French intel? Well, the Texas Instruments security officer told me a case that happened in Dallas, Texas. Happened sometime in 1992. She swore me to secrecy, but I'm going to break the oath now. I'm going to tell you this story. As Texans, you need to know this. And what happened was, it was the offices of Texas Instruments out in Dallas, some out in the suburbs. And it was late one night, it's like 9 o'clock at night, and there's only one Texas Instrument person who's there in the office. And all of a sudden he notices this car pulls up into their parking lot, and a guy gets out and jumps in the trash can, and a big dumpster. So the guy's a little nervous, so he calls the local Dallas PD. The Dallas PD shows up, and they get the guy out of the trash can. And says, well, who are you? And he goes, well, I'm the French consul from the French consulate here. And so the Dallas cop says, but what are you doing? He says, oh, look, I've been driving around, and I noticed Texas Instrument has the best lawn in the whole state of Dallas here, the city of Dallas. So I know they just cut the grass today, so I went inside to get some grass clippings so I could give to my landscape architect at my home to reproduce the wonderful grass that Texas Instruments has around its office space. You can't make this up. You simply can't make it up. Oh man. And so what I really like about all this is the fact that the French were absolutely stunned to find out that a Chinese intern working in an automotive factory, design factory in Toulouse, France, back in I forget the date, 19 whatever, she had been caught downloading proprietary information into a flash drive 2 days before she was supposed to return back to China. So the French had her legally arrested. She served 9 months in jail for having attempted to steal French proprietary information. Our oldest and prickliest ally. Which leads me to the Chinese. And when I say the Chinese, please don't get me wrong. I'm talking about the Beijing government, and I'm talking about the Ministry for State Security. And in my opinion, the Ministry for State Security is the premier intelligence and police institute in the world. Because they don't have rules, they don't have to abide by the rules of law, they don't have to get warrants. They simply do what the Chinese Communist Party dictates for them to do. Now, all I'm repeating here is what John Devers, the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Justice, said just barely 2 months ago. And he said it's the object of the Beijing government to replace the U.S. in all economic spheres. And Bill Priestap, the number 2 at the FBI's Office of Counterintelligence, said the greatest counterintelligence threat, the greatest to the United States today, comes from the Chinese government. And it comes from economic espionage. And John Devers from the Department of Justice characterized the Ministry for State Security and the Beijing government's program is to rob our information, replicate the information, and replace the American industries that they can then compete against. I know this only too well because I live in Washington, D.C. There's a big contract going on right now to replace the subways. And who do you think is the only company that bid enough that Washington, D.C. new subway cars are going to be installed? And want to guess what country just won the contract? The Chinese rolling stock company. They've also supplied all the subways to Philadelphia. They're doing it in New York. They're doing it for Boston. There's not an American company today that produces subway cars. Not a single one. It's all gone. Finished. Solar panels. Solyndra. They sued the Chinese companies for stealing their technology. 10 years ago, there were 29, 39 American solar companies producing solar panels. How many do we have today? 2. They're not American owned. And who do you think produces the most solar panels in the United States today? Weiwa. Mrs. Ming is under arrest up in Canada, being the number financial CEO for Weiwa. They have their own mission here in the United States. $100 billion a year of lost revenue to economic espionage. The FBI and the Department of Justice has warned us about what we may need to do in order to protect ourselves. And the way we do this, and I'll get into counterintelligence in a few minutes, what I just wanted to share, the last one with you, is look how many indictments the U.S. government has brought against Chinese citizens who are here in the United States and have been arrested and indicted for stealing proprietary information from our company. Not military, not diplomatic. Some of it is dual use. Some of the satellite technology that the Chinese citizens have been caught trying to steal, it's dual use. But I use this to show these can be used to help their industries compete against us and replace us. And just 4 days ago, Ron Rockwell Hansen, a DIA employee, was just arrested for providing classified information to the Chinese intelligence service just last week. They're aggressive, they're good, and unfortunately, they get a lot of good things done. So, with that wonderful thought in mind, what does the U.S. government do to protect our national security? We have a whole program of counterintelligence. And it consists of 3 portions. And what I need to do is explain really quickly here. Counterintelligence is the preliminary fact-finding activity that an agency does in order to refute or establish an allegation. Many times someone, I think this guy drinks too much or has too much unexplained wealth. Do we open up an investigation? Is espionage indicated? It could be. but it's a counterintelligence inquiry. Doesn't mean you're guilty of anything. It just means you want to establish the facts. If enough facts and evidence are established, that would lead myself to believe that there are espionage indicators. I am required by law, the Intelligence Authorization Act of 1995, Section 811, that I must refer to the FBI. And if the FBI accepts it, then it becomes a counter-espionage investigation. We believe we've identified a subject. When it's counterintelligence, we don't necessarily have a subject. So let me explain really quickly the three components of counterintelligence. First component, obviously, is what we call deterring. Deterring simply means we have the classified information must be stored in a secure site. It can only be sent on a computer that has encryption on it. That people have to undergo a background investigation before they have access to classified information. All of you here who have ever had a top secret clearance, you know what it's like. You fill out the 171, the FBI or other people go out there and confirm and authenticate all the things you say about yourself. Are you a loyal American citizen? Have you handled money? Do you have problems? And then an adjudication board looks at that information and says, okay, you got a top secret clearance. So that deterring portion there is what we do to eliminate an American citizen with vulnerabilities from getting a top secret clearance. And that's the part of deterring. Now, the detecting portion is a little more complicated. And what this amounts to is we expect, we hope, that the CIA and the NSA can provide us with those tidbits of information that are suggestive that an American citizen, I only worry about American citizens. I never really worried much about foreign citizens from country X who came to America to commit espionage. That normally handled the FBI. But the ones I was concerned about when the CIA or the NSA would give me tidbits, nuggets of information, such as we have reason to believe, based off intercepted Russian communications or based off a Russian mole, that an American employee of the American embassy in Paris from 1995 to 2000 was recruited by the Russians. Well, how many Americans do you think worked in the American embassy from 1995 to 2000? Well, there's State Department, there's DOD, there's intelligence community, there's LEGAT, there's Department of Commerce, there's science officers, there's AID employees, and if you go to a place like Egypt, there's even more. There's Peace Corps. All those people could possibly be the target, the person who was recruited. And could that mole have made it wrong in the fact that it wasn't the actual employee of the embassy, but it was the spouse of the embassy that was recruited because of a vulnerability? Once we start to look at that, it's still only counterintelligence. We're still trying to establish the facts, get the evidence that would lead us to conclude that we have a problem. Now, when we think we've identified an American citizen working in the State Department who was evidencing espionage indicators, there's a couple of ways to neutralize. Sometimes we know we'll never get enough information to open up a full case, but we have enough administrative rules. He or she did not report contact with a Russian diplomat or a Chinese diplomat. He or she has alcohol problems. He or she is showing some financial difficulties. That is enough for us to pull his or her top secret clearance. Without a top secret clearance, they can't work overseas. Without a top secret clearance, they can't handle information. Their career is effectively over. We have eliminated a potential threat, but we haven't gone to court. We can also bring people back and put them in areas of the State Department where they don't handle classified information. And as far as I'm concerned, the Office of Counterintelligence, we have done our job. We have neutralized a potential threat. Now, that individual can rehabilitate him or herself if they do the right things. It's a long process, but if you do bad things, one of the processes we have, if you're overseas and you meet a diplomat from certain countries, it's called the contact reporting policy, you have to let us know. If we find out you're not letting us know, the red flags go off. You can't be trusted. We also have the anomaly program. The anomaly program says if you're talking to somebody and that person reveals to you information that you know is classified U.S. information, you got to let us know so we can do a preliminary counterintelligence investigation. Once we do counterespionage, that's a full-blown case, and I get into that. Now, I'm going to have to take an intermission pause here for a quick second. When I was first assigned to Beijing in 1975, when I arrived there, the ambassador was George Herbert Walker Bush. He was my first boss. He's a great man to work for. And it was with him that I first started learning about counterintelligence. And we learned what the Ministry for State Security was trying to do to penetrate the liaison office grounds. We were not an embassy. To tap our phones, to use the national Chinese who worked inside the liaison office to gather information. We had to be careful what we did, who we talked to. But there was a lesson that I learned from Ambassador Bush that I'll never forget, and I want to share with you. When I was there in December 1975, President Ford and Henry Kissinger came out to Beijing, and they were there to talk to Mao Zedong for the third time. And as part of protocol always dictates, the President of the United States comes to the residence of the ambassador and meets and greets all the staff. There are all 22 of us. And so this is the back of the Bush residence, and there's Mr. and Mrs. Ford, and we're all talking back there. And one of the great things about the arrival is that the White House arrives with this 707 that's outfitted with satellite telephones. 1975, guys, gals, right? Satellite phones. And so what the White House does is they go ahead and they put in a rotary dial, that's all we had back then, a rotary dial phone on the second floor of the conference room of the United States Liaison Office, and every member of the liaison office got to make 2 10-minute phone calls free back to the United States. I'm telling you, for all of us, all the white hairs like me, you know what it's like, right? You pick up the phone back then, they call the switchboard operator, she'll call you back in 10 minutes, the phone call goes through, it sounds like monkeys are on the line. It's terrible. So we got these phone calls. And so later on that evening, I was the night duty officer, and George Bush walked out of his residence, and the liaison officer right on the side, and he comes out, he's got his slippers on, he's got a cup of coffee, and he knocks on the door, and I let him in, and Mr. Bush says, Robert, how's things going? I said, well, the staff has all gone home. I said, President Ford and Henry Kissinger are gone back to Dongfang Hotel. It looks like the Chinese Ministry for State Security is now taken off for the evening. And he closes the door, and we talk a bit, and he says, well, Robert, did everybody get their phone calls in? I said, yeah, as far as I can tell, the list is here. Everybody's checked out. He said, Robert, did you get your 2 phone calls in? I said, I sure did, sir. He said, did you call your mother? No, sir, I did not. He said, Robert, lock the door, come up with me. So we go up to the conference room, and there's the black rotary phone sitting on the big oak conference table. And he says, Robert, go ahead and sit down. Picks up the phone and goes, White House switchboard, Ambassador Bush. Yes. Robert, what's your mother's phone number? 301-671-2252, sir. Yeah, no. Hello? Is this Mrs. Booth? Hold on 1 second, please. You know I can't make that up. And that lesson's always stayed with me, so what I want to tell all you young men and women out here tonight, what I want you to do this weekend, if you can, I want you to call your mother. And I want you, when you hear her, you just tell her, I just wanted to hear your voice. And if you said, wow, what's going on here? You tell her you're inspired to make the phone call because of President George Herbert Walker Bush. It's a great intelligence. Thank you. The most decent, honorable man I ever worked for. And I stayed in contact with him up until the last, through Barbara. And I have more stories, but I won't. But I'll leave you this last photo. The Chinese are so enamored with me. The last time there was at the Great Hall of the People. They made sure I didn't get to go very much any place at all. They had. So, okay, what I want to do now is talk to you about, I'm going to walk you through an actual espionage case. But before I do that, there's something important I need to do, and it kind of puts the whole thing into perspective about espionage and where we stand today. Oleg Kalugin was a general in the KGB, and he defected to the United States under some unusual circumstances. And he wrote a book called The First Directorate. And in that book, he said there were 3 primary targets that we in the KGB targeted in the United States. And let me show you what it is, because I think it's very different from what you expect. His 3 targets, in rank order: the White House. Is he 25 years ahead of his time? The U.S. Congress, and number 3, the State Department. Not DOD, not CIA, the State Department. Is that true today? On April 4th, next month, I will be in federal court when Candace Claiborne, she was on slide 3, will plead one way or another to having sacrificed and compromised State Department classified documents while assigned to the consulate in Shanghai from 2011 to 2015 for money. We'll see what she says. Kevin Mallory was just arrested a couple of months ago. He's a former diplomatic security special agent and DIA employee, arrested for returning from China, $16,500 in his suitcase. TSA was interested. FBI called in. They opened up his cell phone, and in his cell phone, there's a message to his MSS handlers, allegedly, "I have the information, you've got the money," and 4 images of top secret documents. He's currently in jail. Glenn Duffy Shriver, a young Grand Valley University who traveled to China to teach English to Chinese students. Over the course of 2 years, he's befriended by Ministry for State Security officers. He agreed to become a spy for the Ministry of State Security. They told him, "We want you to go to the State Department." He took the Foreign Service Officer exam in China, in Shanghai, failed it. They gave him $10,000 for trying. A year later, they told him he'd like to try it again. He took it and failed it. They gave him $20,000. Then the MSS said, "We want you to try to get a job at the CIA." And he did. But in the detecting part, the deterring part of counterintelligence, he had to submit to a polygraph examination, which he promptly flunked. And under intense questioning by the CIA, Mr. Duffy admitted of trying to join the CIA and the State Department to collect information for money for the Ministry for State Security. And finally, last April, and the gentleman's name is very hard to pronounce, but I'll try to get it correct. Wang Shi was arrested in Brussels, detained by the Brussels police, brought back to the United States. He had gone to Brussels in an attempt for $65,000 to convince a GE technician to sell him the technology on the new the 9X engine that Boeing has been trying to develop for years. It's high bypass turbofan technology, $65,000. They would have overcome what Boeing spent millions of dollars to create and years to do. The trial is set to take place early next year. He's sitting in the Cincinnati jail because that's where GE is located. The Ministry for State Security. Never underestimate that entity. So, Kalugin says it's the State Department. High on the list. We have evidence here that the MSS is specifically targeting the State Department and its employees. Then let's go to the State Department. Well, there it is, 21st and C Street, 3rd largest building in Washington, D.C. And we at the State Department, we in counterintelligence, going for the first component of counterintelligence to protect the secrets that are inside. We have it in a massive buildings. To get through inside the State Department, you must go through ID-controlled gates, you have guns, you have guards, you have ballistic doors, all the hard copy documents must go in these special spin dial safes built by Mosler. And we think we can physically keep anybody outside the State Department, doesn't need to be inside. Luckily for us, on the detecting side of counterintelligence, the FBI has a whole program where they have their assets inside Washington, D.C. and New York who surveil sensitive areas to see whether or not people who are suspicious, people who the FBI and the intelligence community believes are intelligence officers working under diplomatic cover specifically, might be in areas of Washington, D.C. where they normally should not be. Well, in 1999, the FBI lets me know that they see this gentleman who they identify to me as a Russian diplomat, a suspected technical officer. He's been noticed roaming around the outside, and especially the backside of the State Department. And he always wants to come in his, YR is the code name for Russia. So D means full diplomat, YR means he's from the Russia. And he always brings his Malibu, which we nicknamed the Malibuski, to one specific side of the State Department. And we were very curious about that, and we said, even curiouser was the FBI filmed him feeding the parking meters. Now, diplomats don't pay normally the parking meter because they don't care. You can't arrest them. So this guy's paying the meter? There's something wrong here. And they always note that the Malibuski always parks on the back side of the State Department. The front side, the one you saw before, is where almost all the diplomats go into. This is rarely used. So we're very kind of curious about that. And the FBI says, let's open a counter-espionage investigation because he's a bad guy. Let's see what we can do. And then to my horror, I open up the preliminary investigation. And I found out, no, I'm sorry, whoops, whoa, back to 7, sorry. So real quick, so I get you oriented. State Department, backside of the State Department, and on Virginia Avenue, that's where this man is always parking his car. Always on just that street, that small little section right there. And then we notice, the FBI tells me, that he normally goes on the backside and now brings a black bag and he puts it on the park bench and he's got wires coming out into his ear and he's got his hand inside like this and he's doing this and we're watching him manipulate, and then one time he comes out and he's got his hand in the bag and he's got the Washington Post reading it, but it's upside down. So, you know, obviously he's not doing his countermeasures are not that good. And at one point he's got a cigarette in his mouth, he's doing this, and he spits the cigarette out. And this guy's dedicated. And then he's gone. No more activity. All we see, he comes, parks his car, pays the meter, and walks away. So we open up the investigation, and that's to my horror when I found out. 9 years previously, after the fall of the wall, after the fall of the Russian government, the State Department, in its own unusual way, decided that Russian diplomats, irrespective of whether or not they're intelligence officers in the diplomatic corps, they could come to the State Department, pass through the gate, and they did not have to be escorted inside the State Department. They could walk around the State Department as much as they wanted. Any case, the FBI and diplomatic security opened up a full counter-espionage investigation. We nicknamed it Sacred Ibis. Now, for those of you who believe it's computer-generated, I think this one is, but when the last FBI case that hit the press, Varsity Blues, I'm not exactly sure that that was computer-generated. In any case, we open up countermeasures, we bring in technical devices, and very quickly, literally within a week after we open up the case, we find that the Russians have placed a listening device into the 7th floor conference room of the State Department, the Office of Oceanic and Environmental and Scientific Affairs. And very quickly, what we discovered that in that room, the Russians had placed inside the chair rail molding a listening device that was able to capture the conversations of all the people attending conferences in that room. That piece of chair rail molding was always covered by a piece of curtain. When the curtain was open or the curtain was closed, that piece was always out of view by anyone in that room, even the cleaning crews. We put cameras in there, we put video devices, we wanted to see who was going inside, what was doing. We couldn't see what was happening. What are you going to do? We get together at the FBI headquarters, the technical people say, rip it out, we got to find out what's inside it. People talking what we need to do. Long story short, we left it in place. Nothing happened. We finally decided it's time to make the arrest. The Department of Justice says, all we need to do is have people do a conference in there. The microphone in there was apparently sending down the conversations into the Malibuski. When Gusev would pull up, turn on the car, it sent a signal to that listening device. The listening device microphone opened up and captured all the conversation that went on in that conference room. After a point in time, we said, that's enough. DOJ says we have enough evidence to make an arrest. Gusev is arrested outside George Washington University by members of the FBI. He's brought to the FBI headquarters. I'm a diplomat. I don't have to say anything. After an hour, the FBI had to let him go. And the first thing we all do is we have a press conference and out how great we are. But again, we weren't all that great. And that's the device. Not Buck Rogers, not anything fancy, just high quality. The wood is Norwegian birch. The hood in our room was American pine. And that is a very quick espionage case I wanted to run through with you. And that's what I continue to do. I'm still a consultant to the FBI. This case is 20 years old, and it's still open. The question is, how did the Russians get it inside the conference room? Did they have help, or did they do it by themselves? And now I'll make sure Jim comes up here and asks me questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. Oh my gosh, that's too loud. Thank you very much for that overview of counterintelligence. I have some questions here from the audience. With the U.S. government collecting information domestically, how do we balance security and privacy? How does this affect our ability to compete globally with respect to preventing economic espionage?
Frankly, that's a great question for Congress to answer. I think when the intelligence community is allowed to collect on American citizens in the United States, there's some rules about that. And how you collect, again, it's up to Congress. It's a delicate balance. I don't do terrorism at all. I do counterintelligence. Counterintelligence is normally not a life-threatening situation. It can implicate life safety down the line. Terrorism, I get. Terrorism means Americans may die. But I do not have a good answer for that one. I think it's up to Congress working to pass the legislation to allow the intelligence community the tools it needs in order to safeguard the citizens in this country and overseas. It's a congressional thing.
So like an easy one?
I have
I got one here for you.
Okay, I have benefited from telephone intercepts. I've been able to unmask them. I've been able to identify Americans that are doing things they really shouldn't be doing, and we've been able to neutralize some of them. But on the other hand, I don't think that the intelligence community has the right just to hoover all conversations in the world, and especially for American citizens. You American citizens, if you're not involved in criminality, your voices and who you're calling should not really be stored in a database in Wisconsin.
Here's an easy one for you. How much does the current political discord in Washington, D.C. affect the morale of the intelligence community?
Boy, it does. It simply does. When you're not valued and you are disparaged in the news and your leaders are not listened to, you can't help but be hurt. But on the long run, I have talked to a number of my State Department colleagues who are still there. They will still continue to do what the State Department needs to do overseas. They're demoralized in the sense that they don't feel valued by some members in the administration, but they carry on and they will do good work. And for those State Department officers working in Kenya, in Somalia, and in Venezuela until recently, they will continue to do good work. The leaders might have a little more complications working with the administration. All these views are my own. I do not represent the State Department.
With the Chinese winning so many bids within the U.S., do you feel any regulations should be put in place on future bidding to prevent Chinese takeovers?
You can only do it on national security grounds. And in fact, the bidding for the subway cars in Washington, D.C., some members of Congress and others are claiming that the Chinese company may take direction from the Beijing government in order to install certain kind of software and faceware recognition into those subway cars that will allow them to look at who and what is going on inside subway cars and actually listen into conversations. So that's an issue that's going on right now. But it's national security. If Huawei or any other company, the rolling stock company that got the bid for the Philadelphia subway cars underbid the closest competitor by $211 million. It's a state-owned company. I mean, other companies can't compete. Breda is the one that normally competes in a company in Canada, but you can't compete against that. You just can't.
How widespread is the foreign student threat for collecting, stealing information from large American research universities?
3 years ago, a professor at an elite college complained publicly about the theft of engineering, software, and proprietary information at that institution, and that he believed it was coming from the foreign students. The professor was asked to tone it down, and he had not made comments since then. I believe it's significant, and I believe we should be very careful. Currently, right now, there are 365,000 Chinese students in the United States. They come here because they're briefed, and as in the case of the Chinese intern in France, I simply cannot believe they're not downloading information that they can then take back to China with them. That's just my belief.
It's a similar question. How big of a threat do you think the Confucius Institute poses, and what should be done about it?
They're funded by the Beijing government. I've seen reports saying that they are really centers where counterintelligence is occurring, and on the other hand, I've seen other reports saying they're pretty benign. So again, what the intelligence community should do is if they detect American citizens going into Confucius Institutes that they believe might represent a vulnerability, then I think the intelligence community should take an opportunity to interview these people, the Americans who are going there. But beyond that, if the people working in the Confucius Institute has an appropriate visa to be in the United States, all you can do is have the intelligence community monitor what's going on inside in the Confucius Institute and see what they're up to.
Here's a question that's been asked 3 times, so I better ask it.
Okay, one more time.
Why has Hillary Clinton not been prosecuted for having classified information on an unclassified and unsecure server in her home?
Frankly, so many government officials, especially State Department, is guilty of taking classified home to work on. In chapter 3 of my book, I talk about how Assistant Secretary of State Martin Endike, who then became the ambassador to Israel, I had to interview him because of sloppy handling of classified. And during my interview of him, he said, well, yeah, I always took classified home. I mean, my aides gave it to me. So I took it home, I read it at night because I just have too much to do. Taking classified home and working on it in your house is not a good practice. Is it criminal? Technically, yes, but we at State Department handle it administratively. If we found out you were doing it, we would have probably pulled your security clearance. We might have given you a couple of weeks on the beach, and you got a big security briefing, and if we ever find you to do it again, we'd probably fire you. But criminally, I just can't go that far. I'm sorry. It's certainly State Department culture. We're pretty sloppy. like allowing the Russians to walk around unescorted inside the State Department. I mean, it's our culture. It's State Department.
Can a U.S.-China trade deal help protect U.S. intellectual property and lead to changing espionage practices?
Absolutely not. Any agreement we reach with the Chinese doesn't mean they have to abide by it. And there are enough rogue Chinese companies working in the United States and outside the United States who still depend on stealing our technology, and they're not going to give it up. They need to stay alive. And the trade negotiations, I mean, again, the Beijing government has talked a lot about protecting American intellectual property. They don't. They censor, they simply are not responsible citizens of the free business world, in my opinion. Sorry to be so harsh, but that's just the way I am with the MSS.
Could releasing the Mueller report, the Mueller report, and the methods used in the report be considered dangerous to national security?
I would have to believe that the Department of Justice and members of Congress would recognize those portions of the Mueller report that, if released to the public, would compromise methods and sources. I cannot believe anyone in Congress would be that irresponsible. So in that case, no, I do not. There's a question of grand jury, whether grand jury's testimony can be revealed. That's a justice thing, but as far as our ability to collect information, I hope that they would redact that information.
How do you assess the current threat of Russian espionage against the United States?
It's probably number two. They're very good at what they do. Remember, these are people who are identified early on in their careers to go into the SVR or the FSB. They work in the United States under diplomatic cover and other cover, and they are relatively good at what they do. We haven't really, I mean, the issue of the families, was the TV series The Americans is based off, they were pretty low grade. We have not identified and arrested a high grade Russian spy in many, many, many years, which means they are out there and we just haven't identified them yet. We may have identified them, we haven't got enough evidence and facts to try them in a court, to arrest them, bring them to court of law. And remember, it's the Department of Justice who ultimately tells us agents, you've collected enough information. We're out there, a lot of times I go in front of the DOJ, I've got enough. And they say, no, you don't. I have to satisfy the Department of Justice, not me.
What steps can the U.S. government take to prevent employees from spying for ideological reasons?
Almost none. The fact is, if you believe what Kendall Myers, the Cuban spy, said, he's a commitment spy. No unexplained wealth, shows no interest in Cuba. He goes about, he's a great guy. I mean, a great officer. He does his job well. But during the course of the day, he collects tidbits of information. He brings it back to his home. His wife, who was a full co-conspirator, she typed it all up and sent it by flash drive down to Peter Herrera, her contact in in Mexico. So how do we detect someone like that? No unexplained affluence? No Cuba flag, never talked about Cuba? It's like Ana Montes. Ana Montes also spying. She was caught only because a fellow employee, which is highly unusual, went to his security office and said, there's something about Anna that's a bit off, and that is rare. Employees do not turn in fellow employees because they cannot believe they could be a spy. I think it's very hard to catch an ideological spy, Jim. Very hard.
Doesn't the United States pose as great an economic and espionage threat to foreign countries as they do to us?
We probably don't steal their technology because it's simply behind ours. But we are huge, and we can impose our rules and regulations, as does Google and others, onto other countries. That's why you have the French and the EU pushing back. So we are a juggernaut in our own way, and I can see why countries object, especially on the internet and e-communications, about how powerful the U.S. is, and they are pushing back.
Should all U.S. government employees with access to secret information be polygraphed?
Ultimately, yeah. I mean, It is a tool in the deter, detect, neutralize. As I said, Shriver would never have been caught had he not submitted to a polygraph examination. There's a whole historical reason, which would take over an hour to explain the historical reasons why the State Department objects to taking polygraphs, but we're the last holdout. But if you're a State Department employee and you're detailed to the FBI or the CIA or anybody else, NSC, you do submit to a polygraph. Did I weasel out that one pretty good, Jim?
Do polygraphs work? That's my question.
They're not allowed in a court of law. And that says one standard. If you can't bring it in a court of law, can you really trust it? A skilled polygrapher can get the subject of a polygraph to make admissions. It's really more the skill of the polygrapher more than the polygraph machine itself. It's kind of an adjunct tool. A good polygrapher is a great interviewer. And I would sit behind the glass when I'd watch some of our employees being polygraphed, and it's an amazing thing to watch. It is a tool. It's a good tool.
Which State Department spy did more damage to our country, Alger Hiss or Felix Bloch?
If I had to pick between the two, it'd have to be Felix Bloch. I mean, he was there in Vienna, a crossroads where a number of sensitive operations were happening in Europe. He had access to that. Felix Bloch, unfortunately, had the identity of intelligence officers working under diplomatic cover throughout Europe. So simply compromising those identities is massive. Alger Hiss never had that ability. Alger Hiss compromised American negotiating positions on the United Nations. He compromised some other diplomatic initiatives, but not enough that I think really hurt the United States. Remember, Alger Hiss was recruited while he was in the Department of Justice. And when he came to the Department of State, he already was a Russian spy for the GRU, not the NKVD. I'd have to go with Felix Bloch without a doubt.
With businesses going more digital, how do you see counterintelligence protecting our secrets from cyber attacks, specifically in our financial markets?
I was not a cyber guy. It's way beyond my expertise. But from those that I talk to, when you digitize communication, there's just way too many openings. And just like you find with paperwork, if they can compromise the paperwork, they'll compromise the digital stuff. I am scared to death of what I see going out there on the digital lines. And I don't know, because but I've talked to people who are involved in that, and I'd encourage anybody here who has computer sciences skills, please apply to the government. Please help us defend the United States, because it is a tough business out there. Very tough.
The Chinese teach their students English for years beginning at a young age. Very few Americans learn Chinese. Won't we be at a clear disadvantage in the future?
I think the Americans are at a clear disadvantage when it comes to languages, period. We do not do enough to encourage American students to study English. We text, right? We text, howdy, hi, and whenever I give a presentation to a body of simple students and they ask me what they can do to prepare themselves to go into government service, I always say the first thing you can do is please learn a foreign language. Please become fluent in a foreign language. And I specifically identify Arabic, Mandarin, Pashto, Russian. Learning at least one of those, I will guarantee you the intelligence community will be looking for you, and they're giving you a bonus. And I fully agree, we're just terrible with languages. We're blessed because English has become the world's universal language, and so we've become lazy, and our kids have become lazy. I'm a fluent French speaker, and I had to take Mandarin before I went to Beijing. A requirement of the Foreign Services before you can serve overseas in your first tour, you must become fluent in one language, at least. That's for the Foreign Service.
If you had it to do all over again, would you go into counterintelligence?
Absolutely, 100%. It's still in my blood. Yes.
Are there any downsides to counterintelligence?
The downsides are sometimes the long hours. When people say, Robert, you know, how sexy is counter-espionage and counterintelligence? Look, I'm no Tom Cruise. I've never jumped out of a C-117 plane. I don't know what an Aston Martin looks like. James Bond is a counterintelligence officer. He's not a spy, he's a counterintelligence officer. And again, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Would you do it all over again, and what are the downsides?
Yeah, the downsides are it's a tough job in that 80% of it is you're sitting in a room trying to find a needle in a needle haystack. You're going to prick yourself a lot. You're trying to find it. It's a mystery wrapped in an enigma. You've got a guy or gal at the American Embassy, Paris, 1985. And so 80% of my job is doing research online, going to libraries, trying to find, and then finding people who served at the American Embassy 20 years ago. Are they still alive? How can I find them? How can I convince them to sit down and do an interview with me? And then and only then, when I've developed all this information, I have the paperwork, I got the oral testimony, that I can go to the Department of Justice and say, would you take this case? Then I have 5% of real excitement. And if you bother to read chapter 1 of my book, you'll see that unbelievable moment when you finally think you've identified the subject of an espionage case. And all the stuff I did before was just months and months of work. And you have to have a patient spouse. And she's sitting here in the audience. I won't ask her to identify herself, but she put up with a lot of hours, a lot of unexplained where you're going, why you know, and she was very, very good about it. So if you get involved in this business, your spouse has to be somewhat of a partner in this.
What was your favorite overseas assignment and why?
It was Paris, France. Wait a minute now. There's more Hades out there than there Paris, France. The reason why I loved Paris was because my father was in the Foreign Service, and he was assigned there for 4 years, and I was put in a bilingual school, so I was a fluent French speaker. That's also the reason why I worked at Geneva and Haiti in my career. And so we got to Paris. My wife, luckily enough, is a lawyer, was able to continue acting as a lawyer in Paris. I had a 3-year-old daughter. I actually put her in the same school that I had gone to 20 years before, the École Active Bilingue, and Madame Gomez, the principal, was one of my former teachers, so that was a great thrill. We got to go through France. We enjoyed being tourists. All 3 of us spoke French fluently, and it was a great time. The office was great. I had a great ambassador, Pamela Harriman. And she was wonderful. She loved the office. I loved the work that I did. I loved working with my French counterparts. I loved working with my colleagues. And it was a great time. We didn't have a lot of terrorism activity. There was not a lot of negative activity directed against our employees. So in that account, absolutely. When it was 1995, when it was time to come home, I'm telling you, there were some scratch marks down my apartment leading out to the airport. Trust me.
In terms of numbers, Robert, do more Americans spy for ideology or for money?
No, money, absolutely. Ideology it's money. The last 3 cases I just brought up. Candace did it because her house was in disrepair in northeast Washington, D.C., and she just needed money to put 2 of her kids through school and business. The other guy, Kevin Mallory, at least $16,500, and Shriver for money. It's money, sure, absolutely.
Do you think there are more American spies out there who haven't been caught yet?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. No, I mean, you have to think about this. Spies are pretty good at what they do if they're solitary. Betrayal is a lonely business. If you have the fortitude to do it, you just simply go about your business and be patient and careful what you do. Remember what the FBI director said, I think it was Ray, in front of Congress a couple months ago. We currently have active espionage cases in all 50 states of the Union. And you know there are some that are so good they're going to get away. They just are. Rita Valaquez, I don't know if you caught her name, at the bottom of slide number 7. It said State Department. Rita Valaquez worked for the United States Information USAID, and we caught on to her earlier on in her career, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we had her down in South America. We were running an espionage case against her, spying for the Cubans, and all of a sudden, boomo, she marries a Swedish diplomat and moves to Sweden. So we tried desperately to get her extradited back to the United States, and the Swedes believe that espionage is a political crime, not a criminal crime, and they refused to extradite. So Rita Valaquez is one who got away. There's another case in my book. I talk about Brown Tweed Code. I'm not going to go into it too far. This is another State Department employee who compromised classified material. The last we saw him was walking down the hallway of the Secretary of State suite. There are other cases out there that I know where State Department employees with top secret clearances got away. Absolutely. No question.
We are running out of time, Robert, so this will be the last question.
I'll stay longer. I know I got dinner. I'm sorry, my wife wants to get me off the stage here before I say something stupid.
How would you characterize the state of U.S. counterintelligence today?
I think it's relatively robust. The FBI has a program of briefing all American companies about the threat that comes from industrial espionage. We in the State Department, we brief American companies and the people overseas, like I did at Le Bourget. It's a very strong program. Counterintelligence is not defensive. It's actually very offensive. We're out there reminding people of their responsibilities. We're trying to talk to people to come talk to us, to let us know if they feel or they see things out there that might be espionage indicators. I think Congress giving us the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants that allow us to clandestinely monitor people's offices or put microphones in your homes if the judge believes that's warranted. I think we have a lot of the tools, and I think we're relatively aggressive. I think the 2 cases I just mentioned, there are many more out there, and that's the thing that always surprises me when I come and I talk to colleagues. I say, you know how many Americans or Chinese are actually in jail pending espionage? They go, 1 or 2? I know, there's about 45. And these cases are going on and on. So I think it's relatively good. It's just the tough thing is to get an American to come in and say, I think my colleague is exhibiting espionage indicators. That's going to be very hard to do.
Andrew, did you have any closing remarks? No. Okay. Well, Robert, thank you so much for being with us tonight.